Hi guys, it's Claire Akin with the Fiddle Fig Plant Resource Center, and today I want to talk about one of the most common questions that we get in our Fiddle Fig Facebook group. So if you're not a part of the group, check it out. I will link it below. You can post pictures and ask questions about your plants. One of the most common questions we get there is about edema. And so I'm going to talk about that today, and I'm going to use examples from Fiddle Figs, but it really applies to all houseplants. And so when I get this question, it's usually because people have new growth on their fiddle leaf fig and they have these tiny red or brown spots on the new growth. And it can be very distressing because, finally you have a growth spurt in your plant and you have these beautiful new leaves, but they are just speckled with these red or brown pock marks on them, and it looks terrible. It looks like something is very wrong. And so it can be very distressing for plant owners. And so today I'm going to tell you everything I know about edema, how to prevent it as much as you can, and what to do about it. So what I first want to tell you about is what is edema. And so it's also spelled with an O, and it's Greek. It's from the Greek word of edema, or to swell. And so typically we hear this in like a medical context. So, the abnormal or unhealthy swelling of cells. And it's exactly the same in a plant. So edema is actually the abnormal or unhealthy retention of water within the cells of a plant to the point that they actually burst and cause these little red blisters in the plant. And so it's caused by basically having too much water within the cells of your new growth. And there's various reasons for why this happens, which I'll go through today. And so to start, let me just kind of break down the fundamentals of the problem of growing houseplants in general. So in the wild, plants have completely aerated soil and completely perfect drainage. So as it rains, the rain just kind of goes down through the soil and drains away, and the roots always have access to air and nutrients and the right amount of water. But when we bring them inside and we put them in containers, it really kind of screws up this perfect balance that they have outdoors. So first of all, they're in this container where when we water them, instead of the water constantly coming down and constantly draining away, like in a rainforest where fiddle leaf figs, are endemic to, they actually have the water kind of come in all at once and sit in the pot, and it takes days or weeks to evaporate. And so it's kind of this feast or famine of, dryness and soaking, which the plants really have a hard time dealing with. Combine that with a lower relative humidity in your house than in the rainforest, and different temperatures and a lot less light than outdoors, it's hard for your plant to adapt. And so our houseplants are basically growing under kind of stressed conditions. And so this is one of the things that comes out of that is edema, which you almost never see outdoors. You almost never see it on plants that are outside. You see it indoors, and it can be exacerbated by the dryness of the air indoors. And also, typically we actually see it when there's more light on your plant. And so it's a little bit counterintuitive, but we'll go through kind of what causes it and all of that in just a minute. So now that we know kind of what's happening is when you are having this new growth spurt and your plant gets basically too much water, it absorbs the water up to the new growth, and the cells actually burst because there's too much water in them. But what I don't want you to do is limit water during a growth spurt, because actually edema is completely natural and harmless to your plant. So the good news is that all of these spots will go away as your leaf matures. It's not going to cause any damage to your plant, and it's just a natural process that will go away on its own. But if you were to hold back on water while your plant is having a growth spurt, which I've done before, it actually can really damage the plant. And so the new leaves can actually be stunted, and they'll be kind of curled or misshapen. They'll kind of be frozen in time when they stopped getting water and nutrients. Sometimes they can fall off. And so you don't want to stop watering during a growth spurt. You're better off having edema than having stunted growth from lack of water during a growth spurt, if that makes sense. And so let me talk about kind of the things that may be misdiagnosed as edema that you really want to make sure whether or not it is true edema, because if you have some of these other issues, there are different treatments and they can be dangerous for your plant. So some of the key characteristics of edema are, first of all, that it's only on new growth. And so that is not completely diagnostic, because there's other problems that can only be on new growth or that prefer to attack new growth. So that's not kind of a binary thing where you can make this decision, but edema will only happen on new growth. And so that's one thing you want to look out for. The second thing is they're very, very small spots. So 1 to 3 millimeters, and they're either reddish or brownish in appearance, just like a little pinprick on your plant, just a little tiny, tiny blister. They don't get any bigger. They will stay that size, and they don't spread. And so it's not like a spot that's growing or it's spreading throughout all the leaves of your plant. So if you see things that are getting bigger or spreading, that's probably not edema. They also don't leave holes in your plant, and so that's something to look out for. If you have little red spots that are leaving holes, we want to think about things like spider mites or insects and really investigate that. And so the things that I see it confused with are, first of all, rust. So rust is actually a fungus that can attack your plant. You'll see it with people that miss their plants a lot, or if you live in a very humid climate. It looks similar in that it's reddish brownish, but it's more of like on the undersides of plants. It can be on the upper sides of plants, and it does attack new growth, but it's more of like a reddish brown coating on your plant that is actually, you can, wipe it off, and there's actually a substance there. And so if you see that, it's not a pinprick, it's kind of like a pattern on your plant. That could be rust, and so I'll insert some pictures of rust as well. The other thing that it could be is a sunburn. So sunburns don't necessarily happen on new growth, but they do happen at the top of your plant because the sun's coming down on your plant. And so it can sometimes look like it's happening on new growth, but it happens on the top leaves of your plant. And that's a tan or a reddish brown, basically burning of the leaves. And so I'll insert some pictures of sunburn too, when you want to rule that out. With sunburn, there's not a lot you can do. You have to remove the leaves and protect your plant from the sun. The leaves, unfortunately, will not recover. And then the other thing that it could be is insects. So spider mites leave little red or brown pricks as well. But with spider mites, there's a lot of other things to look out for. So you'll see the spider mite kind of webbing of the material on the plant. You could actually see the tiny insects on your plant. And typically spider mite lesions actually leave holes, and they can spread throughout your whole plant. So those are some of the things you want to rule out just to make sure that it is true edema. And so what I do want to say is that it's actually a good sign. So if your plant is having new growth, it means that your plant is basically healthy. And so that's something to be aware of. So congratulations, if you have edema, it means that your plant's healthy, it's doing well, it's putting out new growth. So don't worry too much about it. But of course, I know a lot of people want to prevent it as much as possible. So the best thing to do to prevent edema is actually to have really good drainage. And so you want to make sure that your plant has proper drainage. That, of course, prevents root rot and all of these other problems that we can have, especially with fiddle leaf figs. But having good drainage prevents that kind of like ebb and flow of the watering and the soaking and the drying out. You want good drainage, and you want really good soil. So a really fast draining soil. And so we have a soil that is designed for fiddle leaf figs that drains really, really quickly and allows your plant to not sit in that water. And so having good drainage and good soil are the first things to avoid edema. The second thing is fertilizer. So it's kind of interesting that with plants with an imbalance of either calcium or potassium, they can actually have a hard time regulating the water supply within their cells. And so fertilizers are basically salts. And so salts helps your body and your plants regulate the water supply within the cells. So if your plant is under fertilized and doesn't have enough nutrients, it can cause the cells to retain more water and burst more easily. So you want to fertilize your plant properly so that it has access to the nutrients and the salts that it needs. The other thing that can happen is that it's not respirating correctly. And so it's a little bit counterintuitive that this holding on to water or the leaves having too much water in them can happen in drier environments. And it's counterintuitive because what happens is your plant actually stops transpiring that moisture, and it holds on to the moisture within the plant because it's so dry out and it's trying to retain its own moisture that the cells actually burst. And so problems with respiration can also be caused by when you actually spray your plant with things that allow it, that basically block the stomata and don't allow it to respirate that water as it should. So if you spray your plant with oils or, leaf shines that you shouldn't be using on your plant, coconut oil, milk, I see all kinds of things that people spray on their plants that actually clog the pores and prevent your plant from releasing the water that it needs to release from the leaves. So we do make an all-natural, healthy leaf clean and shine product. It's called Leaf Armor. And so if you really want to clean and shine your plant, I recommend using something like that because it will not clog the pores and it allows your plant to release that water so that it's not building up within the cells. And so Another recommendation I have to prevent edema is to use a moisture meter. So if you're not using a moisture meter, we have one. I can link a video on how to use it below, but it really tells you how much moisture is in your soil and when you should water. And so for a fiddle leaf fig, for example, when you put the moisture meter into the soil, so you want to put it about halfway between the trunk and the exterior of the container, and you want to put it 2 to 3 inches down. And that will give you the same reading every time. And so you want the reading to be at about 4 or less to water a fiddle leaf fig. However, I will say during a growth spurt, I would maybe water around a 5 or so, just to make sure you have that moisture and that your plant has access to plenty of moisture. So using a moisture meter can make sure that your plant isn't sitting in water as it goes through that growth spurt and can help prevent edema. And then I think the last thing that I would say about preventing edema is just to water a little bit more sparingly in the winter months. So we do see this more often in the drier winter months. It actually can be exacerbated by having a lot of light on your plant during the dry months. And so you just want to water a little bit more sparingly during the winter months to prevent this if you're really interested in preventing it, which I know a lot of you are. And so I think that covers everything. I just want to take a look and make sure that I kind of covered everything on my list. And so just to kind of summarize, edema is a good thing. It means that you have new growth. It's totally normal. It'll go away on its own. I'll insert some pictures of what it looks like. And you just want to make sure that you're ruling out, anything dangerous for your plant, like root rot, like insects, like rust. And so I'll link to some of our videos about those below so that you can learn more about those conditions in case you're realizing as you're watching this that, it's not actually edema, it's actually root rot. Then you do want to act because that can really hurt your plant. So I'll link to some of those videos. I will also link to our leaf shine spray, our fertilizer, and our moisture meter in case you're interested in learning more about those. Thanks so much for watching and happy growing.